Today we're going to be looking at the potential of Armor Break Dragon. If you have not seen one of my previous potential of videos, typically I give a unit that is not played a lot a grade between 0 and 3. 0 being unplayable, 1 being very niche, 2 being it's splashable but you really need to build around it, and 3 being very splashable, should be in more decks than it currently is. Usually the rule I give myself when designing these builds for these potential of videos is I try to build the best deck I can that includes that specific unit, not building a deck around that unit. This is still true, but in this case, it's somewhere in the middle there. Armor Break Dragon is obviously a boss monster, so you kind of have to build around him to an extent. I just thought I would kind of get creative with the build while still trying to make it as consistent and as powerful as possible. See, this deck has 2 goals. One goal is in the early game to possibly surprise the opponent with self-damagers and knock them out with a sucker punch from Armor Break. There's also a late game goal, which is to break ride and completely board wipe, and then send them back as far as we can if we're not able to finish them off with a 3 crit swing. Armor Break Dragon's ability is Limit Break 4, Counterblast 3, and discard 3 cards. This will retire all units in the front row. This includes yours. Armor Break then gets plus 10k and 2 crit. He also has the ability that when he swings at the Vanguard, he gets plus 3k, which is not that needed because he's already going to be swinging for huge numbers if you're activating him. It's more of just like if you have to ride him earlier than you wanted to. The most obvious weakness when looking at Armor Break is the discard 3. Narukami is not a clan known for its draw power. With this in mind, I think that's why units like Rising Phoenix are the MVP. Him being able to Soul Blast 2 and get technically a free draw for us is very useful for us to be able to draw into our pieces and then have discard fodder for Armor Break later on. I was originally planning on running lots of Narukami. She is the Libra clone, which is on hit, Counterblast 2 draw card. What would usually happen is I'd use her skill CB2 draw, but then later game when I go for Armor Break skill, I would be 1 Counterblast short because Nutri used up so much of our Counterblast. I still wanted to play her, so I chose to stick her at 2. Since now Counterblast is now going to be a resource that we really need to keep up on, countercharging is very important. So that means Garuda is a really key piece to the strategy. Speaking of countercharging, Zoitin was a unit I really wanted to try out because the soul charging I thought would actually be really applicable. This way we'd have more soul for units like Rising Phoenix, and then we can possibly even splash in Steve because of his Soul Blast requirement and being able to draw more cards actually. I thought would be a really cool synergy. The thing is, since Armor Break is not an Eradicator, we're going to start running into issues where we're not going to have an Eradicator Vanguard on some turns. So then Zoitin does nothing. I didn't want to run into that issue, so I just decided to go with Garuda. We will continue to run into this issue throughout the build. That Armor Break not being Eradicator means we are kind of limited on the units we can play. The decision to run Sharper Dragon as our break ride was kind of interesting. See, usually Vowing Sword Dragon is the more obvious choice, but in this build where the front row isn't really a problem, Vowing doesn't really do much. I still really wanted to play Break Ride because they just make for a good turn 3 play if you're not on Limit Break, so Sharper Dragon just kind of became the better choice. It's really interesting how he combos with Armor Break Dragon, because Armor Break Dragon retires the front row. If you're able to Break Ride him onto Sharper, Sharper then acts and then retires the opponent's back row. This makes our Counterblast 3 discard 3 from a retiring effect to a one-sided board wipe. I wanted to play some self-damagers to give us kind of some cheesy early game plays with Armor Break. Just keep in mind that self-damagers do not work with break rides because break rides activate during the ride phase and you can only play self-damagers during the main phase. In this deck, Stormy becomes a wrecking ball. During an Armor Break turn, she gets at least plus 6k, and if you're doing this with a break ride combo, it is possible that she can go up to 9 or 12k plus. This makes it so she'll be able to hit any Vanguard, or possibly be the second hit on a turn. The grade 2 Daijin makes it onto the list, because him being a 12k attacker means that when we discard almost our entire hand, and he's the only card left, we still have a unit that we can play out on the board, and be able to attack without needing a booster. She did makes it so we can attack the opponent's Vanguard early game, and then late game when Armor Break goes off, they will have more units in the front row. Gauntlet Buster is kind of the obvious choice as a backup ride. Even though he is technically stronger than Armor Break in every way, he still is able to synergize with the rest of the deck. The only thing he doesn't synergize well with is Shaper Dragon, but he still appreciates the 10k, so ever riding him never feels bad. If anything, like there's probably going to be a lot of games where you're going to want to ride Gauntlet over Armor Break. Descendant just didn't really mesh with the deck. Him being able to only discard Eradicators meant that half of our deck doesn't work with him. And then Vermilion is just here as kind of a filler spot. I'm playing the grade 0 Daijin because he doesn't synergize perfectly with Armor Break if you need to ride him earlier, because he will not draw until after Armor Break attacks. But if you have to ride Shaper Dragon or possibly Descendant earlier, then he gives us that free +1 that we're looking for. And when I say free, I just mean he doesn't use up Counterblast, which is a very important resource for us. Some lines of play. If you don't get some early game draw going, it's going to be really hard to activate Armor Break at a time that you really wanted to. And the later you activate Armor Break, the less likely chance you are to win, because that gives them a better chance of getting a PG into their hand. I've made lots of monkey brain mistakes where I wasn't paying attention to the PG, leaving my hand during the opponent's turn. So then I'd go for my play and then notice I'm 1 card short. Same with self-damagers, don't place them while you're using them as hand count. Since Armor Break is a act ability, not an auto ability, you can leave Stormy in your hand until you go for the Armor Break turn. This is so there's a less likely chance that she gets retired. Speaking of being retired, going up against the meta, Kagero and like Genesis will be around a lot right now. Watch out for the PGs because they will ruin your day. Eradicators are still top dog and they can outgun us in most matches. That's why the kind of cheesier self-damage plays I think are really important, since they are also having a hard time drawing into their PGs. That means there's a less likely chance I can be able to block a really early game Armor Break. See what I'm doing now? So when thinking of Armor Break, I think I'm going to go with a grade 2. Grade 2 plus, if that's okay. He is definitely not consistent enough to be in every Narukami deck. Him not being an Eradicator really hurts him. Him not being able to synergize with some of the really like strong key pieces that Narukami has cuts him off at the knees. With this in mind, I still think if you give him a little bit of attention when putting your deck together, he can really shine in a special way. I had a lot of fun playing around with this build. Seeing him get that animation with Naoki is really cool. I didn't think they were going to put that in. If you don't agree with me, that's totally fine. If you can, maybe leave a comment so I can understand why you disagree with me. If you have any other units that you'd like to see potential of videos, I'd also like to hear about it. You can either tell me those in the comments below or just hit me up on Twitter, charles.dinkles. I never know how to end these. That's all I got.